Welcome to The Pivot, where we explore the shifts that open new possibilities for how we see, act, and navigate the world. Right now, so much is changing, faster than we can make sense of. It's easy to feel unmoored, caught between an unraveling past and a future that's still, taking shape. But there are those who can already see what's emerging, beyond the noise, beyond the confusion. In each episode, I sit down with visionaries, thinkers, practitioners, and pioneers who are not just imagining the future, but actually living it. They're sensing what's next and mapping the way forward. So if you're wondering how to navigate this shifting landscape, how to stay grounded, adapt, and even thrive, you're in the right place. This is not about quick fixes or the 7 steps to be more effective. This is about asking the right questions of yourself, of each other, of life, learning how to make sense of this changing terrain and how to move in it. You don't have to figure it out alone. I've got you covered. This is The Pivot. Welcome. Before we begin, a note about this conversation with Rob McNamara. It's a deep dive. We recorded over 3 hours together, but we're unfolding this across 2 episodes. In part 1, we meet at a threshold, not a dramatic one, a subtle one, a place of unraveling where something old is dissolving and the new hasn't arrived yet. That's where we dig in. About Rob. Rob is someone I've known for years. A transmitted Zen master, an executive coach, and the author of several books on elegant relationships and deep listening. His presence is steady and unflinching. He's worked across leadership, development, and spiritual practice in ways few people have. What emerged in this first part wasn't planned. It was more like following a thread, tugging at it, playing with it. Through identity and the quiet intelligence that comes when we stop reaching for answers. This part of the conversation is about falling away, the edge, the discomfort, and the strange clarity that lives inside that. I've mentioned before in other episodes that these aren't interviews, but more like playing jazz, and we were definitely playing jazz here. I hope you enjoy it.
So transformational work in the meta crisis is kind of that's like the heart of it that you're kind of.
It is. It's like that's where the pivot came. I mean, I literally pivoted my work. And then I think why I call it the pivot is this invitation for us. I visually almost like a 45-degree change. Like I don't want to ignore the past. I don't want to ignore what I've learned, best practices, my wisdom. But if I stay with that, that's insufficient. And so how do I turn enough to bring in the emergent? It's like in theory, you, the second half of the you. So it's this marriage, it's not completely walking away from it. It's leveraging the polarities of it. It's, I talk about navigating. The maps that we know are obsolete. So how do we make new maps, or how do we navigate without the maps? What's our sense making? How do I navigate that? What grounds me? What nourishes me? What enables me to have capacities to withstand and then even thrive? So that's kind of the stance.
Well, I guess kind of big picture, every civilization is running on a particular philosophical substrate, and it's a civilization is an expression of that. And when civilizations kind of start to wobble and falter, what's happened is that each civilization has a toolkit, if you will, that solves problems that the prior ones usually didn't. And and it becomes kind of a new central kind of hub for how we live and work and exchange and be in community and do things together. And so, but in doing so, you tend to create new kinds of problems, which, you know, after a civilization kind of peaks, the problems become more and more apparent. And if the civilization can't solve those problems, it then gets into trouble. And that's where we start to see civilizational decay and collapse dynamics, which is, well, over the decades and centuries, these kinds of problems are adding up, you know, because you're usually expanding that civilization's kind of footprint. And of course, now we have a global footprint, you know, so we're kind of pressing out into space with satellites and probes all over the place, and, you know, sending people back to the moon and potentially to Mars. And, you know, like we're kind of going beyond planetary boundaries in some really cool ways. And then we're also crossing planetary boundaries that kind of threaten the survival. And this is all to say, like, this kind of desire to expand and keep going into more, without tending to kind of the ecosystem that allows for life to happen on this planet, is a little bit suicidal.
Yeah.
You know, and this comes back to kind of these deep questions. What are we? You know, like, what is the human being and what is life? And so this is like the philosophical answer to these questions creates the civilization, you know, so kind of the Western Enlightenment was kind of based upon kind of an individualism, a dignity and personhood, a kind of pursuit of freedom, you know, and like, that's like deep in the kind of Western civilizational substrate. And
it's like our DNA.
It's our DNA. And like, literally that kind of, you know, you can pursue whatever you want, as much as you want, as a kind of demonstration of autonomous freedom. And like, nobody should impinge on your right to do that. Starts to run into some planetary boundaries, you know,
we're hitting some limits, aren't we?
Yeah. That, you know, the more you take now, the less future generations have, you know, or at least the more difficult it will be for future generations to navigate their future context, because, well, you know, currently we've crossed, I think, 7 of 9 planetary boundaries or something like that, which means future generations, and to some degree, our generation right now is facing some of it now, but these deep fluctuations are going to bring homeostasis back to the planet. At least that's what complex dynamical systems and those studies tell us. Like, when you get way outside of boundary conditions, some recalibration happens that brings the whole system back into some homeostasis. And, you know, the question from an existential risk is like, well, do we survive that recalibration that is coming from a planetary perspective? But this, you know, just to kind of fold that whole thing back into human transformation in a meta crisis, you know, it's not so much just how do you individually transform, you know, like when I was growing up in, like, you know, the 90s, I'm thinking, you know, I'm kind of this adolescent, super interested in human transformation and growth and development and it really growing Rob.
Right.
And
exactly.
And that's still wholly true and perhaps more relevant to your point of what enables us to have the continuity of consciousness and integrity of being across deep change. It's probably yoked into the capacity that we've developed to self-transform and to author or in some ways direct how do we grow and transform. That's like a deep tethering to ourselves and to our world that without it, life is pretty brutal. At least survey of one.
I appreciate the honoring of that because it seems like there's, and you and I have talked about this a lot. There's been an evolution in that. Before it was, how does Rob develop? How does Dave develop? And it's almost, we have the stories, the long night of the soul. We have the hero's journey. We have, personal test, climbing the mountain, all individualized. But we started, you and I, years ago, started experiencing things in the relational space as very much part of the transformation, even more so, built on the shoulders of personal transformation, personal capacity building, awareness. I'm curious how that fits in from your perspective and where that's going.
Well, this is kind of right at the heart of it is that our, to personally pursue transformation is a good starting point, but it's not sufficient to address the challenges that we currently have. And if you're trying to go alone at this, good luck. You need a deep community of practice that are rooting into profound reservoirs of care that tend to the whole and the individuals. At least that's kind of my sense. And, what is doing that practice? Like, again, kind of like from a Homo sapien perspective, there's a certain answer embedded in that we've hit limits, and like one of the kind of philosophical propositions is that maybe we're homo amor, meaning love. Like we're beings of love is a much more fruitful answer to the question, what are we? And this is part of the kind of collective, I can do my own individual work on this, but like to be in relationship with you, to be in partnership in a deep care and love that transcends or is prior to all of the change dynamics, and actually in the change dynamics actually is strengthened or clarified of, the shit just hit the fan, and all the things that we thought mattered matter much less, and the relevance realization is actually pivoted to something else, which is it's the space between us,
Yes,
and
exactly,
and kind of what's the quality of sincerity and the quality of care that can actually flow between us is a much more fruitful way forward than the individuals kind of tending to their own kind of interests, wants, needs, economic stuff. Like, that stuff matters too, but much less. And so this is kind of where
beautiful. We're so aligned in this, and I'm wondering, how are you making sense of? Well, let me first check and see if you're seeing the same thing I am. But it seems like there's an increase in polarization, an increase in behavior we would put more in a bucket of disdain and hatefulness towards each other as opposed to this love. As the pressure increases, as the confusion increases, we're going into these fight, flight behavioral patterns. And we've, almost as a species or as a collective, we've missed some opportunities, to do exactly what you're talking about. I think, I can think very clearly back to 9/11 or COVID, where there were real wake-up calls. There were real like, okay, we need to do something different here. And yet there seems to be this phenomena of scattering and increased individualization from a survival impulse, I suspect. But what do you think? What's hitting you on that?
Jesus. All right. Well,
it's not like you got an answer, I know, but just, how do we reconcile this? Because this is the ecosystem we're working in as we're helping leaders, we're helping others navigate. If you and I are so clear, and I know we're not the only ones, but if we're so clear that it's around this space between us and nurturing that and then letting that's the spark of creativity. And that's where flow comes from. And, you use the L word, which we almost can't do in a corporation,
Totally.
It's like we all nod and we all, at a deep, deep level know this is true. How do we close that gap?
I'm usually putting on the card table the existential risk that people aren't talking about. And so I'm usually not accused of being overly optimistic. But I do get the question of most people are emotionally distressed and kind of undone by what you just talked about and can't psychologically inhabit the reality of what you just described from it. What are we facing? It's like, the advent of nuclear technologies in the 40s. And as soon as we kind of aggregated enough nuclear weapons to extinct everything on the planet, that was like existential risk number one. Like we never had the capacity to do anything like that prior. And so when we look today and you look at, well, now we've got 35 different classes of X risk. And we didn't go from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 10, right? We're in the 30s, people. And so that's bleak. And if you just keep ratcheting up, technology is going to save us. And it could radically transform the world in crazy, amazing ways. But our current capacity to really understand and manage and feel the externalities of what technology entails, particularly our exponential techs, we're not going to make it at present course. One of these is going to get us. And then we're flirting with things that are even more dangerous than kind of the nuclear. And so I don't get the kind of how are you optimistic, because I'm usually laying those structures down and being like, listen, people, if, and my whole life is defined personally with just an intimate relationship with my own mortality, my own death. And so when I think of our collective, I've literally been seeping in my own kind of self-regulation, metabolization of death in an intimate way that is not normal by most people's standards since I was a child. So it's like I think that affords me a kind of resilience that, if you've lived your life in the cloud of the denial of death, and never really encountered it really intimately. And here you are as an adult just bumping into it with the loss of a friend, or your parents finally died, or you get that diagnosis and you're kind of grappling, you know, and this is your first bout and you're in your 30s or 50s or 20s, you know, you're going to be overwhelmed. You know, it's going to be very difficult. And usually it's just, let me just deny it. Like it slapped me in the face. Let me push it away and carry on as normal. And we just can't do that collectively. But where my optimism comes from gets into some of the stuff in terms of what is overt and what is covert. You know, and that whatever is overt is both distinct and inseparable from what's covert. And that they're non-interchangeable, and there's a co-constructive nature to the overt problems, and then the unseen and invisible ways that we are incredibly strong, like ineffably powerful to persist and remain. And so I can feel the human beings, you know, hundreds of thousands of years of persistence in the face of like crazy threats. Never at the complexity and pace that we've created today, but nonetheless, like there's this incredible lineage that is so beautiful and resilient. And that we're also not just participating with like human intelligences. We're also like, we've been praying and staring at the stars for guidance and literally navigating via the stars. And like, we've turned our eyes, our heads, our minds, our hearts to the heavens as a means of navigating the difficulties here. And that thing is happening. And even it's happening in all kinds of really interesting ways that aren't seen in the overt sense, but can be intuited in the covert movings of the ingenuity of evolution. And we very well, like, and I hold both of these, you know, we very well might be on the kind of cusp of evolution couldn't figure out how to move forward. And like this rock, this exquisite planet won't host life for much longer. And it's done in this kind of pocket of the universe. In terms of sense making, it's really important that we recognize the context that we're operating in. And so, like, just turning attention to the space between us and let's, you know, kumbaya, just kind of double down on love. Yeah. Like, you're screwed. Right. Well said. Survey of one, as I will probably say many more times. Survey of two, I'm with you. But kind of polarization is really profitable. So kind of the legacy economic systems that kind of your digital platforms and your media ecosystems, they actually benefit from the polarization. So there's and more kind of outrage and shock and disdain and hate towards the other, because it quite honestly gets us into, you know, fights with people that we've never met on Facebook, you know, or glued to, you know, whatever channel you happen to kind of have a bias towards. And then it's just like, and so I think that's one part of it is to really understand that the media ecosystem benefits economically from that kind of shocking thing and the kind of seeding of the polarization. And that's like not a small thing.
That's right.
And then the other kind of thing is irregular warfare, which if you aren't oriented towards irregular warfare, you're blinded by the context that almost all civilians are living in, which is this blending of the soldier and the civilian, and where everybody's under attack. And there's very intentional geopolitical campaigns of nudge units and cyber troop units and huge like national state actor like efforts to infiltrate your psyche as a means of controlling and steering and undermining capabilities. And so that's a very significant backdrop that I just want to name.
Yeah.
And then it's complicated by just it, particularly in the West, just the complete immersion in this kind of marketing ecosystem where your attention is constantly being pulled on from multiple different ways. And this isn't necessarily any like, I'm not trying to undermine this democracy, or I'm not trying to kind of spark up this division in this country to kind of undermine that government's capabilities or its electorate or so, like none of that's trying to go on in most organizational kind of marketing efforts. It's just, they created something, they're trying to sell you something. They want you to know about it, but the aggregate noise in the digital space is so big. And unfortunately, what we've learned is that, back in the 1950s, we were thinking about a limbic hijack as a means of controlling somebody. Yes. And it, didn't fundamentally work for a bunch of different reasons. But what we've figured out today, and that what we've known for quite some time, is that the limbic overwhelm works.
That's right.
And it works really effectively. And as soon as your cognition gives up, because there's too much noise and too much complexity, like that's when the very next touch has you. And when you've got bots, you've got bots and you've got AI and you've got learning algorithms, and they're all pressing on you in this kind of very asymmetric way that it's very easy to start to steer and nudge people over the course of, 2 to 5 years. And you think you're just doing your normal thing, but it's not. And so
let me come in because I want to slow this down just a little bit, because I think these are two key pieces. And what I'm getting is these are fundamental movements to help in my sense making. So like the first one, like just understanding my environment, as you described it, the economics of polarization, the incentives of that helps me understand my day-to-day, my mundane existence, right? As I'm going about my day, I can see these polarities. And if I have an understanding of what's behind them, I don't know, I get a sense of freedom. Like I can back away a little bit with some skepticism, some real questioning, as opposed to going on automatic pilot. So I really like how you frame that. And then the second piece, when you talk about irregular warfare,
sorry,
it was great because I think it's a wake up, right? It's a jolt, because if you just said, mass marketing, I'm already asleep. Like I'm already hypnotized inside of this. And this journey from, the madmen of the 50s, like we're really seeing the potentiality of all these things, sometimes exaggerated, but not so much. you really see that whether it's conscious or unconscious, there's a lot going on. It could be under the frame of marketing or selling, but it could also be more nefarious. Just knowing the amount of layering that you're bringing into this is sobering. So it both challenges the sense making if we're trying to navigate, but also we need to know the lay of the land. And I think, that verbiage that you're using, I know is very intentional and conscious. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think of myself prior to understanding irregular warfare. I thought I was a civilian in a context where I wasn't in a war theater.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that kind of exposed me to tremendous risks that I couldn't see because my bias that I'm in a civilian context and like the war theater's over there,
Right.
and it's in this ballistic area over there. Like the fact that we need to look at psychological warfare just to think about how do I, as a coach, and as a Zen practitioner, navigate my day in, Boulder, Colorado is humbling. Like, it doesn't matter where you are, most likely, you are in it, and that your individual psyche is literally positioned against what is probably trillions of dollars of investment in technology and people that are trying to steer attention in a bunch of different ways, which amplifies this whole limbic overwhelm thing. Which,
of course, there's no one enemy. There's no one purpose to the war, is there?
No. Yeah. And are there big thematics going on? For sure. But this comes back to personal development.
Yeah.
Like, this notion of depth that we've talked about. We must cultivate greater depth within ourselves and in our relationships that actually get beneath this noise so that we can actually clarify, oh my God, what matters to my life? What do I really want to do with these people? And whether that's just how do you run your family, or you're trying to run an organization, it's the same deal. Like if your organizational culture doesn't have the requisite depth to operate in this, war theater, you are profoundly exposed.
Yeah.
And so,
Absolutely.
there's like, I think your metaphor is the best that I've found of like, there needs to be a personal hygiene to your psyche daily. If you don't do these things, you start to get uprooted. What really matters starts to kind of get clouded. And now you're starting to think, well, maybe it's this or that. And it's neither, like you lost your footing or your roots in terms of what really matters. And so I've been really inspired by this notion of depth as a personal practice and that as a social injunction, like that enables us, that affords us deep continuities such that like we can know ourselves literally from one moment to the next. Because that's the level of attack. How many of us have picked up, a cell phone to do something and you find yourself doing something else? Mm-hmm. Like we ought to not look over that because it's not an accident, and it's, partly, you need some neurological development and some more integrative kind of growth for your nervous system to be able to kind of handle the technology. Yes. But it's also by design such that like you go into this screen and you are now not in the driver's seat of your attention and your choices.
Exactly.
Rob, you're talking about both the individual, the private personal practice, and then also the relational. And that's something that's important to both of us. As a Zen practitioner, as a coach, as a dad, as a husband, as a man, how are you, like, you've talked about some pretty heavy stuff. We get into the
Apologies.
No. It's more about how do you just not go, holy shit, and go crazy? Like, what keeps the doom scrolling at bay? You know, this rootedness that you talked about, the social injunction. Can you share a little bit about how you're navigating it? Because I think it helps, others here. And I can, I've shared how I do it and how we work with people, but I'm curious from, as a Zen, you're a Zen monk. You've got a lineage, you've got a responsibility for others as well. So there's that part of it too. That's very, intriguing.
And this was not intentional, but kind of intuitively, I found myself disengaging from the kind of digital media, digital landscape quite a bit. And part of it is just, I'm thinking back in like 2001, I would write like deep, heartfelt, heart-opening letters to like friends and lovers, and like email was way different for me. And as the noise kind of crept in, it's like I don't even want to deal with this channel very much anymore, and so like I find myself intuitively distancing from the digital ecosystem that's kind of grasping and kind of pulling and pushing on my attention and what I do with my time and energy. And so that's like a distancing, I think is one thing that I'll just say is really important. And when I do go in, I have a very clear, I want this message, or I'm sending this, and then I literally go in and then I come out. Like there's no staying on top of any of it. Like it's an impossibility.
So intentionality is a key move.
Like you go in, you do what you need to do, and then you leave,
Yeah.
And this is, I don't know if it's the right way, but just it's a way that really works for me, because most of my time and attention is like in conversation with people. Like that's the digital landscape. It's like if you don't have live scheduled time with me, you're not going to get much from me, and that's actually what I want, and this goes back to kind of deeper substrates of my life in terms of this measurement around what matters in proximity to death. Mm-hmm. And so the like I think of it as a practice. There's a proximity of death that wakes us up. Get too close and it's overwhelming, and that limbic overwhelm happens and you become disorganized and you go into kind of all kinds of, you just do stuff that you shouldn't do. So death too close, like is overwhelming, as we know, when we lose somebody that, it was not planned. It was not coming. It was just, it's a tragic thing that happens and we're in shock, and it takes us like 3 months. Like that's the overwhelm, and so that doesn't help us. But then if we have death too far away, right, we start to kind of project our aliveness into kind of these decadal landscapes that may be there. Hopefully they are, but they might not. And like you might actually die tomorrow, or you might actually die in the next 24 months. And so finding the right proximity to bring death close such that it wakes you up and it clarifies what ultimately matters.
This is a powerful polarity, because that movement, if you over-index too far away from death into denial, that you're going to run into trouble, and too close, you get locked, like the limbic grab. So that navigating, yeah.
Yeah, and my experience is it changes. It's not like, well,
right.
It's like,
That's right.
actually, sometimes you can hug it closer and something happens. Like this ineffable depth opens up and you start having more meaningful conversations with yourself.
This is key. So it's not a one-off. It's like it's a companion and you're checking in on a daily basis. So it reminds me a little bit of microdosing protocols where you're trying to find the sweet spot where you're not feeling it, but you're effective. But if you're too far, you're ineffective.
Right. That's a great way to think about it, because you need to microdose death. For most people, like they can't take the full dose. It's just too much. But there are times when you can, and your life will be fundamentally different after. And there's ways that, if you cascade it off too many years into the future or decades, or just kind of live as if it's not going to happen, which is kind of the classic denial of like, well,
that's right.
It's just this thing keeps going. And then all of a sudden, people start dying around you and you're like, well, just keep going, keep the blinders on.
Right.
And that exposes us to tremendous risk, when it's too far, and as well as when it's too close. So that, like, what's the right heat? What's the right thing that your heart responds? It clarifies the mind, the heart opens, and you start having more real, embodied, sincere experiences with, oh my God, this tree is gorgeous.
Yes.
Oh my God, look at the face of my child. Like it's that, oh my God experience. Or you start to kind of courageously have conversations with colleagues, with lovers, with kids that you didn't before, because you didn't have the right kind of gravitas or depth.
Yes. And there's a real personal shift in context, isn't there? Because these things that used to feel challenging aren't so challenging anymore with this perspective. I was in Scotland last week. That was pretty, it was great. Kind of in the bowels of leaders, managers working in, industrial areas all over the world. And, dealing with the existential fears, the very practical disruptions already from the tariff stuff. And I'm watching, kind of the fundamental ways that people communicate and, the efforts being made to communicate and, play well in the work environment go right out the window. It's almost like everyone's defaulting. It feels like a fight, flight, freeze kind of response, but, kind of an amplification or a pressurization, confusing inferences for truth, not exploring, not unpacking, getting activated, and then responding out of that. And one of the phenomena that I'm seeing a lot is people taking airtime, like monologuing. There's no longer dialoguing. It's just, there's almost like an emotional need to keep going, and people's ability to listen is dropping. So, what's going on in groups and teams is kind of falling apart.
Well, it's related to this notion that things are coming between us, and I think this is a generic example, but, you're at a dinner party, and like politics or religion kind of strolls into the conversation, and all of a sudden, like, you were having a nice dinner and you're kind of coherent and you're, but this thing kind of entered into the space, and all of a sudden, we're on opposite sides of the table. And so it's like this difference walked in, and all of a sudden the nervous system pivoted from, sameness, relaxation, trust, and, something emerges, and it pivots to too much difference. And that's we've always been dealing with that. Like that, when is the difference too much for us to metabolize? And then it's like, that's the last dinner party we have with that couple. like them, they're great, but I cannot do that again, And now that I know more about them, let's just socially distance, and let's be cordial, but we don't need to get closer, And so there's I have some backdrop that's fairly normal, and what for thousands of years, we've been navigating that kind of thing, But this notion that technology is in between us, which is hilarious because, we've got microphones and recordings, and you're over in Switzerland. I'm in Colorado. And we're using all this technology to connect and to give an artifact that enables people to allow our dialogue to enter into their interiority. And so this is the gift of it, right? Is that in this moment, listeners are taking in our relationship, and it's now living inside of them in some ways, and hopefully it will be of value. So that's like when relationships between us, but it's actually bringing us closer together. And this is maybe the idealized promise of the internet back in like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. I want to go back to that word, the amount of difference, like too much difference. Because a bit of difference is great, isn't it? Because that's where the disruption is, the diversity of thought, or there isn't a sameness or a homogenization going on. It's sparky. It's enlivening, actually. Creativity comes from that, right? But this, like what's the tipping point where it becomes too much? And you're absolutely right. I can feel it in my body, this reactivity, this activation, and wanting to, not even engage.
Well, and kind of coming back to when technology is between us, and what I mean by that is not just the kind of medium of how we're interfacing, although that can be it, but it's how much consumption of digital kind of interactions and media am I consuming?
Wow. Yeah.
Between our touch points.
Yeah.
And where is that steering us such that when I come back to you, and to your point, I'm less capable to attune to you because I'm kind of filled up. Mm-hmm. And I think we started to get into the kind of irregular warfare and the kind of psychological strategy of overwhelming somebody. There's just too much until kind of the frontal cortex shuts down and we just become really instinctive and reactive in a sense. But I think this backdrop of like too much flow in from world via technology is certainly engineered to get you overwhelmed, to simplify your thinking, to kind of create more of an emotional positionality. And then when you get into relationship, it's like you're just coming with much less capability, much less facility to kind of, oh, really? That's what you think? Can you say more about that? Because I'm looking at it way differently, and where I can't do that anymore. And I'm like, oh, you're there?
Yeah.
Well, that's effed up.
Yeah, I could totally relate. I mean, I think you just described the day I had yesterday. I'm not going to tell you how many Zoom calls I had. It's embarrassing, So I did this to myself. But it's amazing towards the end of the day, and maybe there's a correlation, I don't know, but the more difficult conversations came at the end of the day, the more challenges that popped up. So my availability, in relationship, even to myself, much less to the other person, was dropping rapidly, over the course of that day. So I can really feel what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's in fairly benign environments, right? Nothing was being directed at me. I'm not being overwhelmed except what I did to myself. But, to your point, going further out into the world and what's going on, this isn't insignificant. This isn't just talking about energy management or Zoom fatigue. This is something much more significant than that, I think.
That's my sense too. Particularly when we look at kind of extremism and polarization and conflict, and it's all like we've crossed over these thresholds where this delicate balance between sameness and difference, which is the deep substrate. It's like core facets of reality. If it's just sameness,
Yes.
it's just oneness.
Yes.
Like the color of your shirt in the middle is the exact same as the sides at the shoulder. It's the same color. It's just your shirt is just one thing, And if we think of reality as if it were just one thing, well, I had a teacher in grad school, and he would say, "Would you go see a movie that was just a blank white screen at the beginning? Then the middle, it's the same thing. And at the end, it's the same thing." That's equanimity.
That's right. I've got it.
That's equanimity. So unity is
beautiful,
deeply nourishing, right? But if it's just unity, if it's just kind of sameness, we tend to get bored, disengaged. It's like, we need that splash of color. Whoa, what was that? Oh, there's some drama happening, and now we're kind of leaning in. But this kind of sameness difference is, a fundamental substrate of reality that if you go too far into difference, you find it being chaotic, overwhelming, frightening, and it's like we need to pull back from it. And I think a lot of that's going on and being we're in really, really deep change dynamics to begin with. Like we can kind of put technology as a part of it, but we can kind of set that on the side. Just like the world is deeply, deeply changing. And so the kind of stabilities aren't there. And so it makes sense that we're already going to be less resourced, but this is, it takes practice and training to recognize, to your point, I'm on the edge of my own boundary of what I can regulate and tolerate and metabolize. And I need to kind of slow things down, pull back, deepen into, reconnect with sameness, and that's like a whole skill set. And then it's a whole other one of tracking you, or
sure.
I'm working with this leadership team, and way too much difference strolled into that meeting, and they don't know how to deal with it, and
here's a question I have, because I can hear the polarity of sameness and difference, and the risk, as you're talking about, overusing one at the cost of the other. So the skill is leveraging both, managing both, having early warning systems in place to indicate when you're overdoing one or the other, so you can course correct, and that middle path becomes generous. But what's got my attention these days is, for example, a lot of groups, well-intended groups, in the spiritual self-development, leadership development world, and even in organizational environments, seem to be confusing coherence within a group with sameness. So there's this, you're walking in and the group is already at that far end of that spectrum of wanting sameness, wanting to feel sameness and feeling comfortable, and using language that sounds like there's coherence, where there's alignment, when actually that's not what's happening. So then, you're not moving in the middle. You're actually having to go to the other extreme to start bringing in, inviting, incorporating difference, the spiciness, the color of the shirt, so that there is some sort of calibration. And I'm finding that seems to be getting more challenging in the environment we're in today. What are you seeing?
Well, I think of coherence as a kind of sameness. So we could kind of geek a little bit in terms of how are you using those terms. But I think of coherence as a kind of sameness. But there's a unity that transcends and holds the differences. And that's where we see kind of a team flourish, where you can have kind of these opponent positions that one isn't kind of demonized or made wrong or bad, but is actually championed. Like, let's steel man that argument for the sake of like really understanding the intelligence of that particular position. And likewise, the other one that's in the room, and maybe there's more, but how do we strengthen and clarify the gifts of each one? And then let's flip it. Like, what are the real weaknesses in each of the positions? And for teams that can kind of do that, a coherency kind of emerges that somehow is intimate with all of those differences, strengths and weaknesses included. And like, oh, but we still need to make a decision. And this gets into kind of governance models of like, does the team in an organizational setting or a board, or, do they have the governance sophistication to work with that, and how? And I don't see many working with it very skillfully. Like, it's usually in the org setting, it's either, hey, we're a flat org, we're kind of anxious around any kind of hierarchies. And so they go into committee mode and kind of consensus decision making. And quite frankly, they're screwed.
Right.
Because, it's going to take a month just for them to make a choice,
right.
know, and then the other side is like, well, just the most senior person in the room is just going to call the shot.
Yeah, they got the property rights. Yeah,
they've got the property rights, so to speak. And but so like the skill set, the tool set to create genuine coherence across differences is usually absent in my experience. Usually people are already entrenched in, I have my position and I'm going to try to get this to win, so that the rest of the room, the rest of the group, the rest of the org is going to adopt my position and my strategy, and we move. I get to kind of gain clout and power positionality in the organization. And, when it goes sideways, I'm going to just deal with it later. I can point at other people because they didn't do what I said to do, or, it gets into this kind of, there's not coherence. You're actually functioning with divisions in the organization. So that's kind of the skill gap that I see often, is just how to create coherence across differences and genuinely build kind of a synthesis that where everybody goes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we all relax into it. And am I giving a trade-off? For sure. And I can see other people giving trade-offs, and we're all unified around this particular direction. And then the governance stack is a huge blind spot that I see.
I think you brought in more dynamics to the meaning of coherence as you're using it. I think I was a little bit more narrow. And so that creates a greater range of holding. Yeah, I think it's I'm so comfortable, or let me say it a different way. I'm so accustomed to kind of the conflict or the friction because of differences at the extreme where there's no attempt to find common ground or common purpose or common direction. What I'm finding sneakier is at the other end of the spectrum. So the sameness, and this is, I think I am holding it as a spectrum. So there's good elements of sameness. And then if it's too far over, like at the very end of that band, the sameness, it goes vanilla, it goes homogenization, it goes blank, it goes that blank screen, right? So there's no difference. But it's not that there's no conflict. So this is what I think it almost gets covert. As I'm thinking of some groups that, when the desire, whether it's because, like let's say it's self-development or a spiritual group that just wants everyone to be the same and we're all one, or a team that's the example that comes to mind is like working a humanitarian effort where the mission is so compelling, we're burying our differences. We keep them underground because we don't dare create, ripples because it'll impinge on us fulfilling the mission. So there's all kinds of undiscussables. There's all kinds of dead elephants under the table because we don't dare bring those in. And that's what's got my interest is this, when it's open warfare in the room in a team or a group, you got stuff to work with. You can lean against it, right? But the covert stuff, in the spirit of sameness. And I think there's something extra painful when it's coded in a spiritual or a benevolent or a developmental lens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sounds familiar?
Totally. Just it's in male bodies, it's really interesting. At least a just survey of one. When I see kind of a man who's been rigorously enculturated in kind of a postmodern, sensitized kind of disposition where, you're supposed to be soft and gentle and inclusive and kind and caring and kind of emotionally attuning and, which are all awesome, but like I can feel that they've pressed into this shadow dynamic realm, their aggression.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
And so and it's to your, I love your language, this kind of covert, sneaky thing. It's like the overt presentation is kind, it's soft, it's gentle, the tonality, the facial expressions, the body language, it's all kind of an inclusive, soft, circular thing. But underneath it, this person is aggressive and domineering.
Yes.
And so
Absolutely.
There's that kind of flavor that I think is worth pointing at. And then I think that when we get into polarization, it's the group and the unity of the group. And if you're not flying your allegiance flag, you're exiled. And it's kind of like, and I see that a lot here in the States, where if you aren't demonstrating socially that you're aligned and coherent with this particular mission, you are immediately shot at, and attacked and often exiled.
Yeah.
Usually there's a retribution of get into gear, and in this kind of situation, we're all doing this thing. Because if you're not, you're enabling this other, bad thing, and
it's not just that you're blocking the effort, you're actually working with the other side.
Exactly. And this is kind of why all of a sudden everybody's kind of looking over their shoulder and they're like, do you see, it's almost every kind of social situation. Everybody's kind of pulling up their flags and waving around. You're like, does everybody see me? Like, I belong here. Like, just making sure, like,
here's my hat or here's my shirt.
Exactly. And so that kind of, and it starts to kind of teeter into that cult dynamic And we have kind of antenna around it in spiritual kind of religious ecosystems, obviously, but we don't tend to have the same radar when it's a political movement, when it's a organizational kind of bias, when it's where that like really you can't question like what is going on, because if you do, you're exiled.
Yeah. I mean, just in the week since you and I have spoken, there's so many exhibitions of this in the media, in the news, in our lives, that it's no longer, I really like your point, it's no longer just in kind of the extremes, the occults or movements, but this is in the day to day. This is in the, the quote, the mundane part of life, and that's the significance, when we start talking about the level of change that we're going through, the crises that we're going through, and how to navigate this. I think there's an explosion of complexity and layers on this. So coming back to this feels like almost like a regrounding as I'm listening to you. How do I navigate this?
Yeah. Well, and when I heard you say this polycrisis that we're going through, I was like, yeah, totally. And I think we're talking about what happens when the polycrisis goes through us. Like we're describing, I think, the interior symptoms of, it's obviously around us and we're in it. And how do we kind of, as a community, make our way through as a nation state or as a global community or as an organization, right? But this notion that the polycrisis, metacrisis, is happening on our interiors. Mm-hmm. And this is, of course, Zach Stein's kind of core piece, is that whatever problem you think is the big thing, there's a deeper educational metacrisis underneath all of it. But this, I haven't experienced it until you said it, but I was like, oh, like this multifaceted hyper object that we can't fully understand is moving through our communities and our own private psyches to the point where, per Zach's point of view, we're less capable. And what you're saying, like, I'm seeing people with less capability.
Yeah, I think we're getting into some good territory here. As you brought that in, the image I had, and even almost like a physical sensation is, like invisible winds moving through me and leaving deposits behind, or, the kind of the science fiction image of, like an X-rays being projected into my body and going through me. So it's not that it's out there, it's and it's not only resident in me, it's moving through me. There's something about that's quite potent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you say more about the educations underneath that keyed me up? And I know I've heard Zach speak to that.
Yeah, it's just that whatever crisis you look at, there's a educational crisis underneath or behind it. It even like, okay, there's an asteroid and, it is going to hit. Like, we don't know exactly where on the planet, but it is not a near miss. It is an absolute for sure hit. And we have the technology to identify it. And we have X number of years to do it, to figure out what to do. Do we have the capability to collectively as a species organize like whatever needs to happen, and so you can, even something like it's literally way out there in space and we can't do anything about it. We need capabilities to kind of intervene. And just as an example of like, it doesn't look like human capability has anything to do with it, but then our collective capability to bring resources, perhaps use some of our amazing kind of nuclear technologies to create inflection points many, many million miles away to kind of move it sufficiently that it actually is a miss, would be an example. But all of the challenges, our capacity to slow down the pace of AI development, right? Do we have the capabilities? At present, it appears not, like what's the human capability where we can say, the risk modeling that is happening is insufficient. And we as a community think that slowing down is actually critical for the future of the species and perhaps all life on the planet. Do we have that capability to just slow down?
Yeah.
No.
So right. So as you're bringing education in, this is the ability to learn and then act. Is that how you're framing it? Yeah. Yeah. And you bring in a science fiction movie, but the reality is an AI is right here. And where I go as I listen to you all the way back to 9/11 or COVID as opportunities to be able to learn, adapt, move as a people, as a group, we didn't do so great. So what's needed? If you were going to just start there, and you're very close to Zach, so I know you've got his wisdom as well. What's the call?
Well, I can just speak. Zach's attention, or at least a good portion of it, has been focused on value.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of a resuscitation of that value is an intrinsically evolving phenomenon of reality. And that we can and must participate with it. So he's going really deep into kind of the innate substrate of reality as intrinsically evolving value. And I believe that kind of where we're at from a cultural point of view is that we're kind of in this postmodern sense that, well, value is kind of just socially constructed and we can kind of just decide what is valuable and what's not, which creates kind of this bubble, like a demi-reality. And when I say demi-reality, it's like a small, constrained, narrow, little world, and it's not in coherence with the broader reality that is. And there's inherently risks, like the kid is in a demi-reality where the ball rolls out into the street.
Yeah.
And in that world, the only thing that matters is getting the ball, and left to their own devices, they run out into the street, And I remember a buddy of mine in 7th grade, he's in that demi-reality, got hit, went into a coma, and I think he died about a week later. It was a huge kind of tragic thing in my middle school years, It was like, oh my God, that thing that our parents are constantly like, don't run out in the street after the ball. Yes. Like you got to look around because there's a broader reality to attend to. And so that like that demi-reality is happening to adults, We're racing into the street because, there's tremendous gifts and power and economics in AI as an example. Like we're just racing out there. We have no clue of the risks, right?
You don't even see the car coming in the road yet.
you don't see that
Yeah.
thing because it's actually literally outside of your worldview. And, so some of the like deep investigation of what is real, what is existence, what is the nature of creativity, like this, every civilization is resting on a kind of philosophical worldview. And we're kind of, in the West, we're running this kind of physical materialism where consciousness and value and, it's all kind of just social constructions and, like, let's just race forward with more and more kind of material engineering prowess to control more and more things and some of that's amazing, but we're also like, well, like we crossed like most of the planetary boundaries. Like, shouldn't we slow down a little bit? Nah.
First of all, the demi-reality. I'm excited at the way that's being framed because it gives us access. It loosens our grip on reality, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah.
Because we have such a rigid belief system around that, and a cultural agreement that there's a reality. So that's softening the blow. The other thing is, you've brought a new dimension, you and Zach, around talking about values. So they're not things out there. They're not static. They're not something I aspire to. This is something that's alive or, organic, if you will. So that's got some implications that I'd like to really pursue. So that and reality and what comes to me too is not just the demi-reality, but also the imaginal space. So much of our focus is on reality or what's real. How can we work that? Yet creativity lives in the imaginal, and that's socially neglected. It's been relegated to artists, musicians, historically magicians, shamans. People get in trouble with this. They can get burned at the stake with it. So we've kind of been pushing the imaginal away, and yet, and you're reading more and more about this hunger for it, this hunger for how to loosen the grip of what we're looking at, because there's so much more information possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. And this is kind of, I was like, what's real? What exists? Right. And what is creativity? And that, like, and this gets into some pretty geeky philosophical stuff, but it's like, if we don't go down to this level, we're kind of in trouble. Because, like, as it pertains to the real, like, there's essentially forces in time. And as it pertains to existence, there's literally patterns in space. Mm-hmm. And when we get into creativity, we find that there's like probabilities inside of this space of possibilities. So we're starting to scratch it. Like, there's the real, there's what exists that we can kind of really grab hold of objectively. And then there's this kind of this imaginal space where potentials and probability landscapes. And if we don't nurture that piece, we're in deep trouble.
Exactly.
Because what we're playing with from the real and from particularly the what exists in terms of patterns in space, and I'm thinking of nuclear power plants and like, huge AI kind of clusters that have their own nuclear facilities. Like those patterns in space combined with forces in time, if we're not thinking with the absolute best kind of imaginal kind of ability to feel and sense the whole, it's terminal. Like, we're as adults, there's this really cool ball that rolled out into the street and we're after it.
Well said.
Listening back to this first part of our conversation, what stayed with me most was how alive it all felt. It wasn't polished. It wasn't packaged. It was honest. And Rob wasn't presenting a position. I could tell he was sharing deep inside. And inside, a threshold in a way. And I think that's why it landed so deeply. There's something powerful about hearing someone name the uncertainty, the disorientation, the sense of, I don't know, without rushing to fix it. His pacing always strikes me that way. There's so much, even in between the words, the spaces. And it reminded me that maybe clarity doesn't come from figuring things out, but from learning to feel our way through. And that leadership, especially in times like these, isn't about being certain. It's about staying in contact with what's real, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the map's gone. If that resonates, stay with us. Part 2 goes deeper into practice, how we live, into how we relate, and lead from this place of inner orientation. And if this episode sparked any questions or provided clarity for you, I'd love to hear about it. You can always find me at daveshof.com. The link is in the show notes. Or jump into a conversation over on Substack or LinkedIn. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe. And if you know anyone who might benefit from understanding the times we're in and the need for a pivot for themselves, please forward. As always, thank you for tuning in to The Pivot, where we meet at the edges, explore the in-between, and stay with what's unfolding. Until next time, keep listening, keep feeling, keep exploring, and keep finding your way. This is Dave Schoaf at The Pivot. Go well.